alaikum, brothers, sisters, and all our youth. Welcome to today's session. My name is Taslim Ghazmi, and I'm a volunteer with 14 Youth Club, and I will be your host for tonight's session. Tonight's program is being brought to you by 14 Youth Club. 14 Youth Club aims to promote an awareness and understanding of the message of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and promote this to the highest level. 14 Youth Club is about creating unity within the youth of the different centers within our community. Our events are manned and by volunteers from members of our community who volunteer their time and actively participate in events held both locally within the community and across the country. Events, trips are held locally and nationally and internationally, and not only enjoyed by the participants who come to them, but are also supported and enjoyed by our parents too. Today's session is part of a new online series called Window to Revelation, and is about prophets in the Quran. This is week 5 of a 6-week program, and today's session is about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. There will be opportunities for a Q&A session at the end of the talk, which will be conducted by, mashallah, our religious scholar, Sister Najiseli. Today, as always, we will begin with the recitation of Quran. Can we recite a loud salawat for our young sister Zainab Nakwi, who will recite Quran? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wajjal farajahum.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة رسول من الله يتلو صحفا مطهرة فيها كتب قيمة وما تفرق الذين أوتوا الكتاب من بعد ما جاءتهم البينة وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة وذلك دين القيمة إن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين في نار جهنم خالدين فيها أولئك هم شر البرية إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أولئك هم خير البرية جزاؤهم عند ربهم جنات عدن تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه ذلك لمن خشي ربه.
Wow, mashallah, mashallah. Thank you so much, Zainab. Before I invite
well done, Zainab.
Before I invite Sister Najiseli to begin her talk, a few words about our amazing sister. Born in Qum, her family moved to Pakistan when she was still a young girl, where she completed her primary and secondary education, and after her A-levels went to complete her Hausa studies in Iran. Upon completion, she returned to Pakistan, where she taught for a few years, and then came to the UK, where she completed her master's, married and settled down, and now has 2 adorable young children. She holds workshops and events regularly and participates in all 14 events. She is an inspiration to us all. Can we all give a warm salawat and welcome to Sister Najiseli? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Assalamu alaikum, sister. How are you?
I am fine. How are you? Eid Mubarak.
Thank you. Eid Mubarak to you and all the viewers, inshallah.
Before you start on your talk, I hope the weather is treating you well. I find it just too hot.
You're hoping it is a bit.
Right.
Alhamdulillah.
Before you start on your talk, I'd like to ask you a question, if I may.
Sure, of course.
Right. Our youth, mashallah, have a healthy curiosity and actively look for and are well equipped to do their own research, using all forms and mediums to do so, but first and foremost using the internet. With so much information and sources of information out there, how would you guide them to structure their research?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a very important question, actually, because, as you said, there's so much information from all schools of thought out there, and if we don't know exactly what to do, we can get lost and in this, get overwhelmed by the amount of knowledge that's out there. I think what's really important here is for anyone, not just youth, for anyone who is after a question and who wants to find an answer out there, because there's, everyone is writing and everyone is putting their content out there. It's very important to identify the authentic resources from the unauthentic ones. With regards to their theological questions or questions related to religion, they have to only base their research or look for answers within it's better if they can refer to primary sources, but if they can't, they have to refer to authentic sources. For example, if a question happens to be about theology or anything regarding Islam, personally, I would recommend if they can find a book by a certified scholar. Shaykh Murtaza Mutahiri is one of the best. I would recommend anything that says Mutahiri on it. Read it. That can give us a clear concept of what we are looking for. Also, avoid doing research in bits. You have a question, you Google search the answer, and just randomly there are a few answers, and you read them and then make an opinion. It's always better to. I know there's people find it easier to just read it off the screen, but even if you're comfortable with the screen than a book, probably download a book. And if you have questions about a certain topic, try to read the whole book about it. That's the only way you can form a profound idea and concept of that topic in your mind. Another suggestion or advice that I would give to everyone out there is actually something that comes from our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He used to say, "Qayyidul ilm bil kitaba." Chain your knowledge by writing it. So I would say document everything. By documenting it, you give it a logical structure as well. So you're able to see which areas you have explored, which areas you are sure about, you have an answer, a logical answer to, but which areas you don't. So try to document everything in a logical order. As for anything with regards to Quran, I see this a lot out there. When people ask questions, they tend to interpret the verses of Quran as per their understanding, only by reading the translation of it, because very few people are experts in Arabic in general, let alone the Arabic or the verses of Holy Quran and the depth it has. So in traditions as well, in the traditions of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we are strictly warned against interpreting the verses of Quran based on our own opinions. We may have something in mind, but we cannot interpret and say this is what it's trying to say unless we find it in an authentic book of tafsir and exegesis.
Thank you, sister. This has been one of the questions that so many of our youth these days do ask, and it's very difficult to guide them well. So thank you so much for that.
It can be overwhelming, I think.
Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. So today's prophet, inshallah, is Prophet Ibrahim ala nabiyina wa alayhi salatu wassalam. If the Holy Quran was a novel, and well, every novel has a hero, a main character, and you see that character, grow throughout the novel, and there's a climax, and there's obviously there are twists to the plot and all that. If the Holy Quran was to be a novel and there had to be a hero, Prophet Ibrahim would be that hero. The Holy Quran has given unusual importance to the station Prophet Ibrahim had. Among men, he's given, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given this status to Ibrahim, and among women, for Maryam. I mean, the way Allah speaks about Ibrahim and Lady Maryam, both, is completely unique and unprecedented. There are well, in general, we all have heard stories about the life of Prophet Ibrahim, and since we don't have much time, obviously, when it comes to a prophet of great resolve like Ibrahim, 1 hour of our life is not really enough. So I will try to mention those parts more in detail, which we rarely hear or read about. The birth of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam itself was something, a kind of a miracle, because at the time when Ibrahim alayhi salam was born, Nimrod or Namrud in Islamic, in Arabic, was the king, and he was the first ever ruler to rule all of Mesopotamia. And Ibrahim's uncle, named Azar, he was a very close confidant or advisor to the king. Now, obviously, Nimrod was one of the greatest kings, and as the tradition goes, he was the first ever king to actually have to mint gold and silver coins. So he was eventually blinded by the wealth, by the kingdom that he was given, and he ended up claiming to be God of all gods. And then there were obviously idols. So the main religion of the country was to worship idols. And now this Azar, who's an advisor to Nimrod, is also and he's he used to study stars. So one night he spends all night studying stars and notices something unusual. And in the morning he rushes to the king and says, I have read something unusual in the stars, and according to the stars, there is going to be a child is going to be born, and this child is actually going to be the end of this rule. He's going to bring a new religion, and he's going to end the rule of our religion as we know it. Now, obviously, Nimrod was distressed and worried. So he, just like what happened at the time of Prophet Musa, this is lesser known, but he ordered a decree that every man is to be separated from their women in the country. So no man is allowed contact with his women, except obviously Nimrod himself and family of Arthur, because he is the one of the closest people to Nimrod. So obviously they didn't expect anyone to be born in that family. So Arthur's brother, called Tarukh or Tarah, he had, his wife was called Sarah. Now this Sarah is not to be confused with the other Sarah, who was Ibrahim's wife. Sarah was actually the daughter of a prophet, and she had a sister called Waraqa, and this sister had a daughter called Sarah. That Sarah, later on, Ibrahim marries her. She is his cousin. So they are both Sarah and Prophet Lot. They are the son and daughter of Prophet Lahij. Excuse me. So now, obviously, because Tarukh is not does not observe that the ban or the decree that has been given, he and Sarah conceives a child, and when Azar becomes suspicious, he sends maids to examine Sarah. Now Allah hides her pregnancy miraculously, and they didn't see any signs of pregnancy in Sarah. So the suspicion is then dropped. And after a few months, 9 months passed, and now Ibrahim is born. Now that the baby's here, it's hard to hide him. So Azar then becomes suspicious, and he says, "What if this is the baby that the prophecy is about?" So he insists on taking this baby to Nimrod and see what he says, what he decides about him. Now Sarah begs him and says that if you let me take him away from the city, I'll just leave him in a cave and let him be and see what happens. If it's, if God's have it destined that he lives, then he will live. Otherwise, he will die. So Azar then agrees to that. Now Sarah takes him out of the city. There's a cave that she knows. She leaves him there, cuddles him, nurses him for the last time, and then she leaves him and covers the mouth of the cave with some stones. She goes out of the cave and back to the city. Now Ibrahim is left there in that dark cave with no one to look after him. And at this point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes milk gush out of his thumb, and he feeds on that milk and grows. Now his growth is unusual as well. He grows where a normal baby would, he would grow a week faster than a normal baby. So in one day, he has the growth of 1 week. So after maybe 1 week, when Sarah somehow takes leave and secretly comes to the cave to check on him, she is then relieved to see that her baby is thriving and he's being taken care of. And she thanks God, and she's feels comforted. And she nurses him again and leaves him. So days go by like that, and Ibrahim actually grows in that cave until he is 13 years old. Now, this is amazing that he had no contact whatsoever except his mother. He sees no one and nothing at all, not even nature. So in that cave, he's living his life. Now, in philosophy, there's a phenomena. It's like if we were to see if something is innate to human beings or not, we have to see what a human who's left out of touch with any kind of civilization, any kind of human contact would think. That is what a human, because when we are born into civilizations, into certain societies, we then start to learn those norms, those patterns, and sometimes our innate understanding of different things can then be contaminated. So now Ibrahim is a perfect example of that phenomena, perfect example of a person who has never, whose thoughts and whose heart has never been contaminated by outside influence. So he can think clearly, and within that cave, he had begun to think and question his existence, about his existence. Where did I come from? Who could have created me? Okay, there's a world outside of this cave. Who created that? Who created my mother? So he has this innate consciousness of God, even when he was in the cave. So by the age of 13, he's also strong enough to remove the rocks on the door of his cave and come out of the cave. And one night, he decides to just come into the world and removes those rocks and steps out. It was probably, the time was dusk and it was getting dark, but he sees a road or a faint kind of path leading one way. So he starts walking on that path until so eventually he keeps walking and walking until he reaches the city. And somehow, obviously back in those days, the cities were not like what we have now. So he goes to his mother, and when Arthur sees him, he's anxious to see that this child has now grown up, and now during those years when Ibrahim was in the cave, his father has passed away, and his mother had to marry Arthur. Now he is his stepfather as well. So again, Sarah begs and begs until he agrees to keep Ibrahim and not report him to Nimrod. Then the Holy Quran has mentioned a few encounters of Prophet Ibrahim with the priests, with the monks of the temple, and with his stepfather about the idols. The first one happened when he said, Azar, said, "I'm going to worship the gods." Ibrahim gets excited. He was obviously searching for a God, for meaning. All these years he was thinking, and he's excited now that I will finally get my answers. I finally get to meet my Lord. And he goes with him. And now in the temple, he's observing everyone. And there are these idols sitting there, they can't move. And people are offering the offerings, they're putting food in front of them, which they cannot obviously eat. And they're praying to them. Now Ibrahim is very confused. He actually asked some innocent questions. Do they hear you? Because they didn't look like anything that could hear them. There's nothing in their eyes that would show any kind of comprehension. So he asked them, when you talk to them, do they hear you? And they answered no. Okay, so can they harm you? Can they give you any benefit or harm you? They said no, not really. So he decides that these can't be God, and said, why are you worshiping them? Now Azar he's also a priest himself. He's worried. because he's become the center of attention now, and everyone is staring at this child who's just come out of nowhere and has started to question their faith. He takes Ibrahim out and talks to him privately and tells him that actually these are just representations of real gods. So if you're interested in knowing your God, then I'll show you the real God. Come with me at night and I'll show you the real gods. Now he takes Ibrahim to the rooftop at night, and there he sees that the priests are looking at the sky and doing their own, the rituals they do. They see a star. Now it says star in the Holy Quran. In the traditions, we find that it's actually Venus, and this was the second half of the moon's course. So the Venus is still in the sky, and it takes a while for the moon to come out. In any case, now Ibrahim feels like, okay, this is something that looks more like, something sublime, something you could actually humble yourself to. And now he's wondering, can this be the God then? But after a while, he sees it, that the light has gone. And now, and again, that innate logical, intellectual reasoning of Ibrahim says, he disappeared. A God, if that star was God, God shouldn't end. God should be ever present. He can't just disappear like that. Then the moon comes, the same thing happens, and then the sun. You all have heard the story. And eventually, even when the sun set, now this is the first time Ibrahim is seeing these things. We have to keep this in mind. When the Holy Quran starts the story of Ibrahim from this point on, there's no mention about his life in the cave. That we get from the traditions. But if you don't have that background, you may wonder if this is something Ibrahim used to see every day. So why is he surprised at the sun going down? So when the sun came up, this is now for the first time Ibrahim is actually seeing that magnificent, glorious sunlight, and he thinks, okay, I think this is something we can bow down to. But then it sets, and again, now he's rationalizing everything and saying, okay, it has gone down. I do not worship anything of any of these things that you worship, but rather I will bow down and submit myself to the one who created everything. Sun, the moon, the stars, whatever that exists clearly. So he sees that everything is dependent on another, everything is coming, going, there's a start, there's an end. So he comes to the conclusion that there must be one who doesn't end, there must be one who doesn't have a start, there must be one who doesn't need a creator. So he says, Aslamtu li Rabbil Alameen. So I can only submit to the Lord of the whole universe. So the Holy Quran says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُورِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ كَلِمَاتٍ وَكَذَلِكَ نَرَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. When his innate consciousness turns into a well-thought certitude about God, Allah then chose him. And it is said that Malakut was then made visible to him. Ibrahim, when he would look at the ground, he would see the depths of the earth. When he would look at the skies, he would see the Malakut. So he was given this vision, and he's then chosen. And at that point, then Allah starts to speak to him directly or through angels, and he's appointed as a prophet. Excuse me. So he's formally started to invite people towards monotheism. Very few people actually believe in him until the fateful day when that festival was about to happen. everyone left the city, and as we all know that Ibrahim salam then went into the temple with a hammer and breaks down all the idols except one that was considered to be lord of all those idols. And when people come back now, he deliberately creates a scene here where everyone is looking and everyone's attention is turned to him, and then he puts forth a question. He says, okay, you can see that all the idols are broken except one, so why don't you ask him? He's the one who has the hammer in his hand, he's the one who's not broken, maybe he did it. And at that, his uncle or stepfather Arthur, without thinking, spontaneously responds and says that, they can't talk. How can they answer? How can they answer your question? And Ibrahim that seized that opportunity and says, if they cannot even protect themselves, they can't even answer you a question, how can they be your gods? How can you worship them? Upon this now, obviously, because there's no answer that they can come up with, they're attacking him now verbally, and everyone is shouting, kill him, burn him. Sometimes even today this happens when people, certain authorities, for example, want to take the people's attention off of a legitimate, important issue. They create a drama somewhere else, and everyone's attention is focused on that lesser important issue, and the real problem goes unnoticed. That's actually happening for years and years, and people are busy with their little problems, following Instagram pages of celebrities and what's going on in their lives and scandals and all that, while the greater issues, the real world issues, are going unnoticed. So now this fire is the Nimrod then decides that this is a good decision. This is what Ibrahim deserves. So a huge fire, something that wasn't seen before, the likes of it wasn't seen before, is now being lit in a huge pit. There are 4 walls around that fire, and the first ever catapult is built in order to throw Ibrahim into the fire, because the fire was so great that no one could actually come close enough to throw Ibrahim into the fire. Now, when he's in that catapult sitting, the Archangel Jibreel comes to him and asks him, he's anxious now, and says, is there anything I can do? And Ibrahim smiles and says, not from you. I don't want anything from you. And one of the reasons why Ibrahim was selected by Allah to be Khalil, his friend, was the fact that Ibrahim would never ask anyone else for help. Now Ibrahim is sitting there and whispering the supplications, and according to the tradition, he remembers the same kalimat that were taught to Adam alayhi salam, and he remembers the 5 the Ahlul Bayt, and at that point, Ibrahim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down Archangel Jibreel, and he gives Ibrahim a vial, and in that vial there's a tunic, and instructs him to put that tunic on, and also a ring according to traditions. And he says, when you're being thrown, just put this ring in your mouth. Ibrahim does that, and when he's thrown into the fire then turns into, timber is growing all around, and it turns into a garden, like we've heard since our childhood. And after 2 or 3 days, when the fire has apparently gone down, Nimrod now climbs up a ladder to check on Ibrahim and finds him praying there, and next to him is Jibreel alayhi salam, and they are both supplicating and praying to their Lord. And at this point, Nimrod, despite himself, he says, how much must the God of Ibrahim love him for him to do this? But then his stubbornness got better of him, and he then decides to exile Ibrahim. And Ibrahim, at that point, he's now, because of the blessings that Allah had given him, the barakah, and also because he was an intelligent lad at that point, he had expanded his business, so to speak. He was owner of a lot of land. Well, he was left quite some herds and stuff from his father as well. So he expanded them. So he then says to Nimrod that if I have to leave, I will leave with my herd. So people who a majority of people had come to believe in Ibrahim after this incident. So they all leave with Ibrahim. Some of them, well, there were a few clans and tribes. Some of them took their own path and said, we'll find a land where we can worship God freely. And some follow Ibrahim, and eventually they settle in the Holy Land in a place called Hebron. During the way, on the way, they actually there was an interesting encounter with a king of Pharaoh of Egypt called Arara. This Arara, when Ibrahim, started his journey, he made this a kind of what is it called? A box, not really a box, but something for Sarah to sit in. Sarah now, his cousin, he's already married to her. He made that to make her comfortable and also to protect her from unnecessary, let's say, attention, because they are now out in the open, and he thought it would be better to protect her in case something happens. So that when they go through the land, of Egypt at that time, there was a custom that every caravan that passes through the land has to give 1/10 of his possessions as tax. Now Ibrahim pays that custom, but then, because first they have to go through the belongings, and the guards come to where Sarah is and say, open this box. And Ibrahim is reluctant. He says, you can just guess whatever amount you think is in there, and I'll pay the tax for it, but leave it unopened. Now that intrigued them even more, and they want to open it. Now, reluctantly, Ibrahim let them open the box, and now Sarah is sitting there wrapped in a cloak. She was extremely beautiful as well. So now, because of the whole box and her unusual beauty, the gods find it interesting, and they go and report the whole incident to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh then orders Ibrahim to come to his presence. So Ibrahim says, that is better for me to leave my wife behind without protection, and I can't come, I can't go. So then they are both allowed to go to the court. And now it's very interesting. Ibrahim was very protective and very loving towards Sarah. Sarah, in our traditions, she has a lofty station, unlike Bible, which has painted her in a different portrait. When Sarah was to marry Ibrahim, she actually made some conditions, and she said that one of the conditions was for Ibrahim to always obey her and listen to her. So Ibrahim actually accepted that, and he thought to himself that it is worth condition. It is worth for me to accept it. in order for me to marry such a pious woman. So in that sense, we can say that he was both of them are actually quite modern. Now Ibrahim is very both Sarah and Ibrahim have this ideal, beautiful relationship, and now they are in the court. The Pharaoh then came forward because, well, his religion was, according in his religion, probably there was no problem for him to come and touch the wife of Ibrahim. So he stretches his hand to touch her, and Ibrahim then prays silently to his God that, please don't let this happen. Let not this man touch my wife. And his hand just freezes there in midair. And when he sees that, he realizes that there's something unusual about these people. And then he says, did your God do that? He said, yes, I prayed to my God. He said, okay, I will not, I promise I will not touch her. I will let you pass through my lands. Just ask your God to give my hand back to me. And Ibrahim prays again and says, if he's truthful in his promise, give him back his hand, and then he's cured. Now, automatically, the Pharaoh is humbled to Ibrahim, and when Ibrahim and Sarah are walking away, he walks behind them. At this point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands Ibrahim to not walk in front of that king. He said he is, whether a believer or not, he is a great king. Don't disrespect him in that manner, because if you leave him disrespected and humiliated in front of his own people, after you leave, there will be chaos in his country if they don't have that respect for their king anymore. Because even sometimes a bad ruler is better than having no ruler at all. So sometimes even in elections, we know that no one is actually perfect. We have to make a choice between bad and evil, because having some kind of rule is better than chaos. So Ibrahim stops and he says, my Lord commanded me this. I will not walk in front of you. When the king hears that, he's even more impressed and humbled, and he actually accepts Islam. I say Islam because, well, there's only, when we submission is called Islam. And actually Ibrahim was the first one to actually use the term Islam and Muslim, and he said, I am submitting myself. And the Holy Quran has given him that honor, acknowledged that honor, that your father Ibrahim coined the word Islam, and Allah liked it. And actually then he made his religion Islam. The religion of the one religion of God. Well, for us, when we see out there are plenty of religions, but in the Holy Quran, Allah says that there's only one religion. Quran doesn't believe in religions. There's no word adyan, deen. There's only one way, and the one way is to actually worship Allah. Okay, now you can call it Christianity, you call it whatever, but in Malakut, in reality, up there with Allah, there are no multiple paths. So now this happens, and Ibrahim is on his way again. And I said he settled down, and I think it's because we're running out of time. There are a few interesting points. I think I'll just mention those and then wind up. So there are quite a few things that is actually Ibrahim is the first one to do. For example, the first ever human being to have worn undergarments was Prophet Ibrahim. He actually came up with the idea. The first ever person to have worn shoes made out of generally shoes, but he made them out of leather. Then he was the first person who grew white hair or white beard. Before that time, people did not used to their hair did not used to turn white. So as a sign of dignity, Allah then turned Ibrahim's beard white, and then it carried on. The first ever prophet to wage war in the way of God, when there was a war in Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot, who was Prophet's cousin, was taken captive. He actually goes to war against Rome and frees him. So he's the first one. Actually, there are only 4 prophets who've ever gone to war with a sword. And there's another actually very interesting encounter with a man called Maria ibn Aus, and he was the first person. I mean, Ibrahim and Maria, when he found out that he was actually Khalilullah, that he's seeing, he was so overwhelmed with emotions that he embraced Ibrahim. So that's where actually the tradition of embracing another believer started. So the first one to embrace another believer. In qualities, Ibrahim was so extremely compassionate that we read in the traditions that when the Holy Prophet ﷺ went to Mi'raj and he was ascended to the heavens, he saw a very graceful, dignified man with white hair and beard, and he's surrounded by some children, and he's embracing them and hugging them. And when he asked who this was, he was told that this is Ibrahim Khalilullah. And children who pass away from this world when they're still young and they're children, they in barzakh, this job is given to Ibrahim to be a parent to them, or just nurture them. Ibrahim and actually his wife Sarah. Now Ibrahim has the most famous that everyone agrees upon is 2 sons. We all know Ismail and then Ishaq. Ismail was born when Prophet Ibrahim was around 86 years old, and we can't go into detail about the how they were left in how Hajar was left in Bakka. Hajar is now I forgot to mention that the Egyptian king then gave this maid called Hajar to Sarah, and eventually then Ibrahim marries Hajar because Sarah and Ibrahim did not have any children, and Sarah actually requested Ibrahim to marry Hajar, and that's how Ismail is born. And when Ismail turns 13, the famous zibh or sacrifice happens, where then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns that zibh or sacrifice into the greater sacrifice. Now here when he says فَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ, we know that it cannot be that ram that was brought by the angel, because it's an insult to Ibrahim when he is then swapped or changed into a greater sacrifice. Ram is not greater than Ismail. Traditions say that this Ismail was spared in return of the sacrifice of Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala. Now this is the test that Ibrahim gives, and after this test, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually gives him the station of imamat, and he says, "Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama." Now in this ayah it says we tried and tested Ibrahim with kalimat, because before this, now Ibrahim was given this knowledge that the kalimat or the Ahlul Bayt are going to be from your progeny. And at that point, when Ismail is the only son he has, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders him, commands him to sacrifice him. Now he has in mind that this is my only son, and this is my only hope to have a progeny, and in my progeny were going to be the Ahlul Bayt, and now that is being taken away from me. That was the biggest challenge for Ibrahim, and he still submitted. That's the beauty of the story of Ibrahim. As the Holy Quran tells us the story of Ibrahim, we go from the levels of submission, from one level of submission to another at every stage. So he starts by submitting at first to an unknown God, and then starts submitting in his deeper and deeper depths and levels of his soul, until this greatest test comes when he has to submit once again. And because of that, that submission, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, I have now made you an imam, and raised your status. Now, interestingly, in Old Testament, it says that at the age of 99, Abram, he was called Abram before that, then was changed into Abraham, because Abram means Lord of, father of many, and Abraham means father of many nations. Now, Abraham, from Abram to Abraham, at the same time where Quran says, "Inni ja'aluka linnasi imama," now you have become an imam. It is also interpreted because the letter Ha is now there. In Hebrew is the fifth letter. So because now the Ahlul Bayt have been added to your progeny for us, for certain, for sure, you have become, your status has been raised from Abram to Abraham, or in other words, now you are an imam. And Ibrahim knows exactly what to ask for at the right moment. He says, "Wamin dhurriyati," please make this imamat to run in my progeny. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers that prayer. One of the qualities, that characteristics that Allah has given Ibrahim is that all his prayers were answered. So when he says that, obviously Allah answered his prayer, but at the same time warns him that just being from your progeny is not enough. This imamat will not go to anyone who la yanalu ahdi al-zalimin, to oppressors. The oppressors will never become an imam, or they will not be given that station. Now, Ibrahim, being the father of all nations, the father of all prophets, almost all prophets that who come after him until the last prophet, is the key point. And actually, I think if we know the story of Ibrahim and then Ishaq and Ismail, the history of the mankind, and all the issues, the religious, political issues that we are facing for last probably more than 2,000 years, become all of a sudden they become crystal clear. Why? The whole issue is about this blessing that Allah promises Ismail, and he says that I'm going to bless Ismail and make this imamat, and then eventually the rising of Al-Qa'im والسلام, in his progeny. Now the whole problem that the Jews of Medina, around Medina, had when the Prophet before Muhammad declared his prophethood, was the fact that he was from Bani Ismail and not from the progeny of Ishaq. And in Old Testament, we see that they put, instead of Ismail, they're saying that Ishaq was the one who was sacrificed, because then they know that right after that, Allah promised him the progeny and that blessings that he's promised. So the whole issue, as I said, is the Ahlul Bayt, and especially Imam of our time. And everyone is just like everyone wanted to claim that Prophet Muhammad is from them. Everyone is actually want the Imam of our time, the Messiah, to be from among them. So it's going to be, this is all going to lead us into that last battle of good and evil, and inshallah the haqq will prevail. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi tahirin.
Mashallah, mashallah. Very, very interesting. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
Very,
you.
very interesting and very, very informative, Sister Najis, as always. There's never enough time. There's never enough time to really go into depth of you know, it's just not enough time. But and you've touched on so many things that, inshallah, if we have had more time, we could have gone into more as well. But one of the things that you know, when we speak to our children, we say to them that the characteristics of the prophets and the imams, and to focus on them and to be like them. So you have, mashallah, 2 young children. So what would you say were 2 or 3 of the characteristics that you would say to them about Prophet Ibrahim to bring into the forefront when
I think the most important one is, again, that spirit of submission and contentment that Ibrahim had, no matter what happened in his life, what came his way. The toughest of all, you know, the toughest tests were given to him, having to live the whole childhood in a cave. He was content with whatever his Lord gave him. That's something that's missing from our lives, especially these days. Not just children, everyone. No one is happy with what they have. That's one thing. There was another remarkable quality that Ibrahim had, was he loved to share whatever he had. So we find in traditions that he actually used to go out and look for people, and if he could find anyone hungry, a traveler, someone poor, he would bring them to his house, share his food with them, give them gifts and blessings. So much so that he wouldn't go and eat until he could find one. And even during the night, he would go around distributing food items to people.
Inshallah, I hope that the viewers have found this very interesting. I certainly have, and I've learned so much. But what I take back from this is just like what you said, sister, is that quality of submission and of patience, and always putting your best forward. And inshallah, this is our last session. This is our fifth session this week. We have one further session with yourself, Sister Narjis, next week on Prophet Yaqub. Inshallah, if any of our viewers have missed any of our sessions, or want to look at our regular events and our forthcoming events, you can go onto YouTube. You can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Any suggestions or things that you would like to see in the future, please do contact us. Our next session is next week, and it's our last session on Prophet Yaqub, next Friday, 14th of August, 7:30. Everyone, please be safe. Thank you again, Sister Narjis. Again, an inspiration.
Thank you very much, Sister Tasneem. Thank you.
To Sister Zainab for her Quran recitation, and above all to our viewers for their contributions and their continuing support. Jazakallah khair. Eid Mubarak to everyone. Enjoy with your families tomorrow, and inshallah we'll see you again next week. Allah Hafiz.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.